Serving my country is an honor. But the price of that honor is sometimes too high. I lost a lot when I was away. But the greatest loss came when my 6-year-old daughter asked, "Dad, why does Uncle only come over when you're not home? And why do I hear those noises? But Mommy says it's a secret." That question turned my world upside down. And then I decided to do something they'd never forget. Let's start from the beginning of this story. After 6 long months overseas, I finally came home. There's no feeling in the world like stepping off that plane and seeing your family waiting for you. Sarah stood there in a blue dress I'd always loved, her smile lighting up like we were still newlyweds. Emma, our 6-year-old, broke free from her hand and came running toward me. "Daddy!" she squealed, launching herself into my arms. I caught her and held her close, burying my face in her hair, trying to memorize that moment. For the first time in months, I felt whole again. The first few days back were perfect. Sarah was glowing, more attentive than I remembered, and Emma stuck to my side like glue. We had dinners at the table, played board games, and shared quiet evenings like nothing had changed. I convinced myself life was back on track, that whatever small cracks had formed in our marriage while I was away would smooth over with time. But then came the night Emma asked me a question I'll never forget. It was bedtime and I was tucking her in. We'd gone through our little routine: 3 hugs, 2 kisses, and I'd read her favorite story. I was halfway through when she stopped me, her small hand tugging at my sleeve. "Daddy, why does Uncle Ben only come over when you're not home?" I froze, my voice dying mid-sentence. I stared at her, trying to process what I just heard. "What do you mean, pumpkin?" She shrugged, her fingers playing with the edge of her blanket like it was no big deal. "Well, he's here a lot when you're gone. I hear him talking to Mommy, and she laughs a lot. Sometimes I hear noises, like banging and stuff. When I ask Mommy what it is, she says it's a secret game. She tells me not to worry about it." Her voice was so innocent, like she had no idea what those words could mean. But I did. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I forced a smile and kissed her forehead, pretending everything was fine. "Oh, I see. Well, you don't have to worry about any of that. Okay? Daddy's home now." She yawned and rolled onto her side, clutching her stuffed bunny. "Good night, pumpkin. Sleep tight," I whispered, my voice barely steady. I stayed by her bed for a moment, staring at her peaceful little face, but my thoughts were anything but calm.
Uncle Ben.
He wasn't family, just Sarah's brother's best friend. He'd been around for years, always the helpful guy. He'd show up to fix something, have a beer at BBQs, or join a poker night now and then. I never thought twice about him. But now, Emma's words were playing on a loop in my head. Her laughter, noises, a secret game. I stepped out of her room, closing the door gently behind me. Sarah was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters and humming to herself. She looked up when I walked in, her smile warm and easy. "Everything okay?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yeah," I said slowly, leaning against the doorframe. "Emma's just full of questions tonight." She laughed, shaking her head. "That's our girl." I smiled back, but inside, I was anything but calm. My thoughts were racing, connecting dots I didn't even know existed. Sounds, laughter, a secret. That was the moment my life turned upside down. And I had no idea it was just the beginning. I met Sarah at a summer barbecue right after I got back from my first deployment. She was vibrant, full of life, the kind of woman who could light up a room without even trying. She laughed too loud, talked with her hands, and had this way of looking at you like you were the only person in the world. I was hooked from the moment she called me out for hogging the last burger. She always said I was her rock. I remember saying to my best man at our wedding, but maybe that rock started to crack when I wasn't around. We had our quirks like any couple. She had a bad habit of losing her house keys and blaming me for hiding them when they'd turn up in her bag. And I was notorious for leaving my boots by the door, which she swore was some kind of assassination attempt. "You always leave your boots by the door so I can trip over them," she'd yell, laughing as she threatened to toss them outside. For a long time, those little things kept us grounded. They reminded us we were still a team, even when life got messy. But the last few years, they were different. I wasn't around as much as I wanted to be. Between deployments and training, I was more of a guest in my own home than a husband or father. Still, I thought we were strong enough to weather it. I told myself that the arguments, the distance, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore, it was all temporary. But now I'm wondering if, for her, those weren't just cracks in our foundation. They were a convenient excuse to find something or someone else to fill the gaps I left behind. The next morning, I couldn't shake Emma's words. They played on repeat in my head, filling every quiet moment with doubt and unease. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I wanted to believe Sarah, to trust her like I always had. But something about the way Emma described it, the laughter, the noises, the secret game, it didn't sit right with me. After breakfast, when Emma was settled on the couch with her crayons and favorite coloring book, I decided to confront Sarah. She was in the kitchen, rinsing the dishes from our morning meal, humming softly to herself. For a moment, I just stood there watching her. She looked so normal, but that didn't stop the knot of suspicion tightening in my chest. "We need to talk," I said, leaning against the counter. She glanced over her shoulder, eyebrows raised. "What's up?" I didn't waste time. "Emma told me something last night. She said Ben's been coming over a lot while I'm gone. She also said you call it a secret game. Care to explain?" Her hand froze mid-rinse. It was a split-second hesitation, so brief someone else might have missed it. But I caught it. I didn't say anything, just watched as she forced herself to keep moving, setting the plate on the drying rack. "Oh, John," she said with a nervous laugh. "Emma's a kid. You know how she is, always making up stories. She's probably just confused." I didn't let her off the hook. "She said she hears you laughing with him. Said there's banging and noises. And you told her not to worry about it." I folded my arms, my voice steady but firm. "What's going on, Sarah?" Her head snapped toward me, her face flushed. "You're serious?" she asked, incredulous. "John, come on. Ben's been helping me out while you're gone. That's it. He fixed the sink a few weeks ago, helped me move the dresser upstairs. You know I'm not good with that kind of stuff." She let out an exasperated sigh. "You really think I'd cheat on you? With Ben? That's ridiculous." "Is it?" I asked quietly, not breaking eye contact. Her lips parted slightly, as if she didn't expect me to push back. Then she crossed her arms, her voice growing defensive. "John, I can't believe you'd even think that. You've been gone for months. Do you have any idea how hard it is to do this alone? To take care of the house, Emma, everything? Ben was just being a friend. That's all." She was good, her voice cracked just enough to sound convincing, her eyes wide with what looked like genuine hurt. Maybe if Emma hadn't said what she did, I might have bought it. "Just a friend," I repeated. "Yes," she said sharply. "A friend. You're imagining things." I let the silence stretch between us, watching her squirm under my gaze. Finally, I nodded slowly, my expression softening. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm just overthinking it. It's been a long few months. I'm sorry for jumping to conclusions." Her shoulders relaxed, and she offered me a small, tentative smile. "I get it, John. You've been under so much stress. I don't blame you, but you don't have to worry. I love you. I love our family." She reached out, resting a hand on my arm. I smiled back, forcing the corners of my mouth to curve up. "I love you too," I said, my voice calm and even. But inside, something cold and unshakable had settled in my chest. Her excuses didn't add up. Her smile felt too forced, her words rehearsed. She thought I believed her. She thought I'd let it go. But in my mind, a plan was already forming. One she'd never see coming. By the time I woke up the next day, my decision was made. If Sarah thought I was the kind of man who could be lied to, the kind of husband who wouldn't notice the cracks forming in his own home, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. At breakfast, I kept my tone casual, like nothing was wrong. I told Sarah that I'd gotten a call from my commanding officer. They need me back for a few days, I said, sipping my coffee. Some paperwork and briefings they want me to help with. Sarah looked up, her fork pausing midair. Already? She asked, her voice soft with what sounded like disappointment. Yeah, I said, shrugging. Duty calls. She sighed and gave me a small smile. I guess I can't argue with that. We'll miss you, though. I'll miss you too, I said, locking eyes with her. I wondered if she knew just how much I meant that, or how little she deserved it. By the time I was packing my bag, my plan was already in motion. I told her I'd leave the next morning, giving myself the day to get ready. But instead of preparing for a military trip, I spent those hours installing hidden cameras and recording equipment around the house. I was meticulous about it. Small devices tucked into the corners of rooms, disguised as everyday objects. One in the kitchen, another in the living room, two upstairs. I even set up a motion-triggered audio recorder in the hallway outside the bedrooms. It wasn't just paranoia, it was strategy. Years of military experience had taught me one thing above all else. Trust is earned, not blindly given. By the time the cameras were in place, I had eyes and ears on every part of the house that mattered. That night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, Sarah leaned her head on my shoulder. I pretended to relax, even though my mind was racing. I'll call as much as I can, I said softly. You always do, she murmured, her voice full of warmth. I almost believed her in that moment, almost. But then I thought of Emma's innocent face, the way she'd asked me about the laughing and the noises. The doubt came rushing back like a punch to the gut. The next morning, I kissed Emma goodbye, telling her to be good for her mom. I hugged Sarah and told her I'd call when I got settled. She smiled, her arms wrapping around me tightly. Come home soon, she whispered. I will, I said, forcing a smile as I walked out the door. But I didn't go far. I checked into a hotel just a few miles away. From there, I connected to the cameras, watching the live feed on my laptop. I left the house, but now I could see her every move. I told myself I wasn't hoping to catch her in the act. Deep down, I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to prove to myself that I was overthinking, that I'd let my doubts cloud my judgment. But as I stared at the screen, I couldn't shake the feeling that my world was about to come crashing down. The hotel room was eerily quiet, my laptop screen casting a dim glow as I watched the live feed from the cameras I'd installed. A part of me hoped, despite everything, that this was all in my head, that I'd overreacted, that Sarah was right, and I was just imagining things. But around 7 p.m., the first motion alert came through. I clicked on the feed from the living room camera and saw her. Sarah was sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, scrolling through her phone like it was just another normal evening. But then the doorbell rang. I watched as she set the glass down and hurried to the door, smoothing her hair. She opened it and there he was. Ben. He stepped inside with a casual smile, and she hugged him, too closely, too comfortably. They walked back to the living room together, and I forced myself to stay calm as I watched them settle on the couch. First, they just talked. She poured him a glass of wine, and they sat there laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. But the way she leaned in toward him, the way her hand lingered on his arm, it told me everything I needed to know. I wanted to stop watching, but I couldn't. Not yet. After a while, they got up and moved to the kitchen. Sarah was cleaning up the glasses, and I saw Ben come up behind her. He placed his hands on her waist, and she didn't flinch. Instead, she turned to face him, smiling in a way that made my stomach churn. He leaned in, and this time, I couldn't pretend I was imagining it. She let him kiss her. I switched to the feed upstairs. I'd installed a camera in the corner of our bedroom, disguised as part of the decor. It had felt wrong at the time, but now I was grateful for it. They entered the bedroom together, and any remaining doubts I had were gone. They laughed, talked, and acted like they had all the time in the world. Eventually, they crossed a line that couldn't be excused. I watched it all, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. Every smile, every touch, every betrayal was burned into my mind. When it was over, They stayed in the bedroom, completely at ease. Sarah didn't seem worried, didn't even glance at her phone to check if I'd called. I sat there in the hotel room, staring at the screen. My chest felt heavy, my thoughts racing. But I didn't let myself fall apart. Instead, I saved the footage, backing it up in 3 different places. I'd seen everything I needed to see. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore, it was about what came next. And I had no intention of letting them walk away from this unscathed. Their game was over. But mine? It was just getting started. I sat in the hotel room, watching the feed on my laptop. My mind was already racing with plans for how I'd handle this. I thought I was prepared for anything at that point. But then, something happened that made my blood run cold. The camera upstairs showed a small figure stepping into the hallway. Emma. She was clutching her stuffed bunny, her little feet patting softly on the carpet. She looked half asleep, her hair sticking up in every direction, her eyes squinting as if she wasn't sure if she was dreaming. She walked toward the master bedroom, probably looking for her mom. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "No, baby," I whispered to the screen. "Go back to bed." But she didn't. She stopped in front of the slightly open door and pushed it wider, just enough to see inside. Her face froze, her small body stiffening as she stared. She was too young to understand everything she was seeing, but she understood enough. Her hands started to shake, and her lip quivered. And then the tears came. I watched as she stood there in the hallway, silently crying, clutching that bunny like it was the only thing keeping her upright. My chest felt like it was going to cave in. She didn't deserve this. She didn't deserve any of it. And then Ben's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Close the door and go to bed." The way he barked at her made my blood boil. She jumped, startled by his tone, and ran back to her room, slamming the door behind her. The hallway camera caught her curled up in her bed, sobbing into her pillow. That was it. That was the moment I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I didn't need any more proof. Sarah and Ben had already betrayed me, but now they'd hurt Emma. They'd taken her innocence and shattered it, leaving her to deal with emotions she couldn't possibly understand. I closed the laptop, my jaw clenched and my fists shaking. This wasn't about patience or strategy anymore. It was about my daughter. Their game was over. It was time for my move. Part 8. The confrontation, the break in the home. The drive back to the house was a blur. I don't remember the streets I passed or the stoplights Elle ignored. My focus was razor sharp, locked on one goal, to end this charade. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for the soft glow of the upstairs bedroom lights. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as I sat there for a moment, breathing deeply, forcing myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to let my emotions cloud my judgment. Not now. I walked into the house as quietly as I could, my footsteps muffled on the carpet. The living room was empty, the wine glasses still sitting on the coffee table, one tipped over. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint sound of voices from upstairs. Before heading to the bedroom, I went to Emma's room. She was curled up on her bed, her stuffed bunny clutched tightly to her chest. Her little face was streaked with tears, and her breathing hitched as she sobbed softly into her pillow. I crouched down next to her, brushing her hair back gently. "Emma," whispered, my voice as steady as I could make it. She turned to me, her big eyes red and puffy. "Daddy," she hiccuped, her voice barely audible. "Hey, it's okay," I said softly. "I'm here now. Everything's going to be okay." She nodded, but her grip on the bunny didn't loosen. I kissed her forehead and stroked her hair. "I need you to do something for me, Pumpkin. Remember your friend Maddie? You're going to have a little sleepover at her house tonight. Okay?" "I already talked to her mom." Emma sniffled, nodding again. She trusted me completely, even though she didn't understand what was happening. I grabbed her overnight bag from the closet, packed a few essentials, and carried her out to the car. I dropped her off at the McCall's house without a word of explanation, only telling Mrs. McCall, "Something came up at home. Can she stay for a couple of nights?" Mrs. McCall must have seen something in my face because she didn't ask questions. She just nodded and ushered Emma inside. Once Emma was safe, I drove back to the house, parking down the street this time. I didn't need Sarah or Ben hearing me coming. When I walked into the house again, the voices upstairs were louder, more relaxed. I climbed the stairs slowly, deliberately, each step feeling heavier than the last. The voices grew clearer, a mix of casual laughter and light conversation. My chest tightened with every word, but I kept going. I wasn't going to stop. When I reached the bedroom, the door was partially open. I pushed it the rest of the way and stepped inside. There they were, Sarah and Ben lying on my bed, our bed, like they belonged there. Ben's shirt was off, and Sarah was laughing softly at something he'd just said. They didn't notice me at first, but when they did, the shift was instant. Sarah froze, her smile vanishing as her eyes locked onto mine. She scrambled to sit up, pulling the sheet around her. Ben shot upright, his face pale and wide-eyed. "John," Sarah started, her voice shaky. "This isn't." I held up a hand, cutting her off. My face was calm, unreadable. "Don't." My voice was low, steady, and left no room for argument. Ben started to stammer, taking a small step toward me like he was about to explain. "Look, man, I took a step forward, and whatever he was about to say died in his throat. He backed up instinctively, bumping into the dresser. "Don't say a word," I said, my tone cold and firm. For a moment, the room was completely silent. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, as I stared them down. Sarah clutched the sheet tightly, her face crumpling as tears began to fall. "John," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Please, let me explain." I glanced at her briefly, but there was no emotion in my eyes, just cold detachment. "Explain what? That you let him into my house? Into my bed? That you lied to my face over and over?" Ben tried to edge toward the door, but I stepped in his path. I didn't touch him, but the way I moved was enough to make him stop in his tracks. He looked at me, then at Sarah, and I could see the panic in his face. "Leave," I said, my voice quiet but firm. He hesitated, glancing at Sarah as if she could save him. She didn't say a word. After a long pause, Ben grabbed his shirt and hurried out of the room, his steps heavy on the stairs as he rushed to leave. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah dropped to her knees, sobbing, her hands clutching the sheet around her. "John, please," she begged. "I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking. We can fix this. Don't leave me. Don't give up on us." I stared at her for a long moment, but I didn't feel anything. The woman I'd fallen in love with, the mother of my child, was gone. All I saw now was a stranger, someone I no longer recognized. She was no longer a woman in my eyes, I thought, just a cheap doll. I didn't say a word. I turned and walked out of the bedroom. She crawled after me, grabbing at my arm, begging me to stop, but I didn't even acknowledge her. By the time I reached the front door, I could still hear her crying upstairs. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me, and walked to my car. I drove aimlessly for a while, lost in thought. My mind replayed every moment, every lie, every choice that had led to this. But I kept my focus where it mattered, on Emma. Finally, I pulled out my phone and sent Sarah a message. "If you still care, Emma's at the McCalls. Enjoy your last few days with her, because I won't let her stay in this environment. We both know why. They thought they could play me, but they were wrong." I spent the next few days in silence, processing everything. The footage from the cameras played in my head on a loop, not because I wanted to relive it, but because it fueled my determination. This wasn't just about what Sarah and Ben had done to me. It was about Emma. They had shattered the safety and innocence of our home, and I wasn't going to let that go unanswered. Step 1 was ensuring Emma's future. I reached out to a lawyer first thing in the morning, explaining the situation in cold, clear detail. By the afternoon, I had filed for emergency custody. The recordings were all backed up, ready to be used as evidence. No judge in their right mind would let Emma stay in a home where this had happened. Step 2 was exposing the truth. I wasn't interested in revenge for the sake of it, but I wasn't going to protect Sarah and Ben from the consequences of their actions either. They made their choices. Now they'd live with them. The first people to receive the footage were Ben's colleagues. He worked at a small firm where professionalism and integrity were everything. I didn't have to do much. Just send the videos and let them see for themselves who they'd been working with. Within hours, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Ben had been called into a meeting. By the end of the day, he was jobless. Next was our circle of friends, most of whom I'd known for years. They were more than just drinking buddies or holiday dinner guests. They were people I trusted, people who had supported Sarah and me through thick and thin. They deserved to know the truth. I sent the footage with a short message. This is what's been happening behind my back. Thought you should know. The fallout was immediate. Calls and texts flooded in, mostly from shocked friends offering their support. A few reached out to Sarah, but I didn't care. I knew exactly how this would play out. By the third day, Sarah was at my hotel door. She looked terrible. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen. She barely managed a hello before bursting into tears. "John, please," she begged. "I know I hurt you. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but you don't have to destroy everything. We can fix this. Please, let's just talk." I stood there watching her, unmoved. "Fix what, Sarah?" I said, my voice cold. "What's left to fix? You destroyed our marriage the moment you let him into our house. You didn't care about me. You didn't care about Emma. And now you want me to care about your reputation? Your comfort." She dropped to her knees, clutching at my hand. "It wasn't like that. I was lonely. You were gone so much, and I didn't know how to handle it. I made a mistake. But I love you. I love Emma. Don't do this to us." I pulled my hand away, my face unreadable. "You don't love me, Sarah. If you did, we wouldn't be here. And as for Emma, I'm doing what's best for her. What you should have done." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stay to listen. I closed the door, leaving her in the hallway. By the end of the week, my lawyer called with good news. The judge had reviewed the footage, along with character statements from mutual friends and neighbors. I was granted full custody of Emma, with Sarah's visitation rights limited to supervised weekends. As for Ben, his reputation was in shambles. He lost his job, his standing in our social circle, and the respect of everyone who knew him. Last I heard, he was staying with a friend in another city, trying to pick up the pieces of his life. Sarah tried to rebuild her life too, but it wasn't the same. Friends distanced themselves, whispering behind her back. Her once perfect facade was gone, and she had no one to blame but herself. I didn't care about either of them. My focus was on Emma and giving her a safe, loving home. They thought they could play me, that I'd let them get away with it. But they were wrong. After the custody ruling, Emma and I moved to a new city for a fresh start. She adjusted quickly, though the first few months were hard. She had nightmares, waking up in tears, but I was always there to hold her and remind her she was safe. Over time, her smiles returned, and we found peace in our new life. Sarah's life unraveled. She lost her social circle, her reputation, and most importantly, her role as Emma's mother. She tried to reach out to me a few times, but I ignored her. I had nothing left to say. Ben fared no better. Jobless and disgraced, he eventually left town, trying to escape the mess he created. Sitting on the porch of our new home one night, I thought back to everything that had happened. Sarah and Ben thought they could betray me and walk away unscathed, but I made sure they couldn't. Now it was just me and Emma. She was my reason to keep going, my reason to rebuild. I promised myself she'd never grow up doubting her worth or her safety. They thought they'd taken everything from me, but in the end, I walked away with the only thing that mattered.